If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Psalm 126, the 126th Psalm. This is where we're going to spend our time. You, all in here, all of you, or some of you, may or may not be aware of the fact that this particular psalm, as with many psalms, they're not all written at the same time, they're not all written by the same person. We know that Moses wrote at least one, Psalm 90. We know that Asaph, whoever Asaph was, one of the musicians in David's court, wrote many. We know that David wrote some. And so the Psalms are a collection of writings that span a period of history in Israel for about 600 years. They're not just written all at once. And this particular psalm is a very interesting one. There are several like this. Psalm 137 is written in a similar period. This one is written around the 530s BC after Persia had come and set Israel free from Babylonian captivity. So if you read the book of Esther, if you read Ezra and Nehemiah, you're reading in that same period of the subsequent release of the Jews from Babylonian captivity. And here on the third Sunday of Advent, what can this text teach us about Advent? So let's take a look at it. I'll begin reading in verse 1. When the Lord restored the well-being of Zion, we thought we were dreaming. At that time we laughed out loud and shouted for joy, and at that time the nations around us said, "Look at the Lord's accomplishment, the things that He has done for these people." The Lord did accomplish great deeds for us, and we were happy. O Lord, restore our well-being, just as the streams in the arid south are replenished. Those who shed tears as they plant will shout for joy when they reap their harvest, and the one who weeps as they walk along with the seed bag will certainly come in with a shout of joy when they bring the sheaves of grain in. So we're reading a text here wherein you've got the nation set free from Babylonian captivity, 70 years, which, by the way, none of which had to really happen in the way that it did. The superpower now on the scene is the Persians. And through Darius, the regent king, the regent under Cyrus, and by the way, Cyrus is mentioned by name in Isaiah 140 years before he ever appeared in history. By name, in two different portions of Isaiah, chapters 44 and 45, that Cyrus the Persian king, through Darius, his regent, would set the nation free. And that's exactly what happened. Now some people, some scholars as a matter of fact, attempt to redate this portion of Isaiah because they say, well, obviously if this is written about something that had not happened yet, that's impossible. So they'll just redate the text and say this is what's known in the textual criticism field as second Isaiah. Well, I'm not one of those. I think Isaiah wrote it while he was in Hezekiah's court, and God gave him the information, and it became what happened 140 years later. And for the Jews, this particular prophecy that Isaiah gives would be kind of mysterious for them because at the time, they didn't know anything about Babylon. They didn't know anything about the coming captivity. But then you read further and you see how Jeremiah told them straight away, look, when the Babylonians come, and they are coming, even though there were prophets around Jeremiah's time who lied to King Zedekiah and said, no, don't worry about it. They did come, and they didn't have to come in the way that they did. The reason they came in the way they did is because just what Jeremiah said would happen did happen. They resisted the Babylonians. They would not surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and burned it to the ground. None of that had to happen. And so when you come to a text like this, where they've been liberated, you have to keep in mind that there have been 7 periods of Israel's history since the time of Joshua, wherein they've gone through this up and down cycle of being close to God, sliding away from God. God brings a foreign power from within the context of Israel to attack them, to make them miserable so that they'll come back to God. Now that sounds kind of capricious in many ways, kind of like what's God doing here? But you have to remember we're His creation, and if we're going to live and flourish as God's creation, the best flourishment we could find would be close to Him. So in bringing these foreign powers to Israel, what He's doing is trying desperately to get them to come back. Turn the misery meter up. Turn the dial for misery up as far as you can get it, so that you'll finally, you and I, and Israel as well, will come back to the Lord. This is a common feature throughout the history. It had occurred since the second generation, right after Joshua. Let me read something for you here in Judges, just to give you a perspective here. It says in Judges chapter 2, the people worshipped the Lord throughout Joshua's lifetime, and as long as all the elderly who still had seen the good things that God had done were alive, they continued to worship God because they had witnessed all the things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua the son of Nun died at 110. People buried him in the land in Timnath-Heres, the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. That entire generation, however, passed away, and a new generation grew up who didn't know anything about the experience of seeing what the Lord had done as the Lord's presence went with Israel and what He had done for Israel in the time of Joshua. So what happened? Well, the people who remembered all this stuff just got old and died. And so what happened? They turned away as soon as somebody, and you read it in the book of Judges, right? Ehud gives them 80 years of peace, and then Ehud dies, and they slide away for another 20 or 30 years, and then Deborah shows up. Deborah shows up, they come back to God because, why? Because the Canaanites are attacking them, making them miserable. And then Deborah shows up, they drive the Canaanites back, God does a miracle, everybody's happy, the nation comes back to God, and then Deborah dies, and then they slide right back. So this history has been going, and there have been 7 cycles of this up until the Babylonians were finally defeated by Persia. So this is the cyclical nature of the nation of Israel. I'd say it's greater than that. It's the cyclical nature that we all have. Really, it is. I mean, when things are going well for us and we don't feel any need to depend on God at all, we don't. We just look to our bank account or to our jobs or to our families or whatever. Psalm 137 speaks into this in the same time period as this psalm. And in 137, they speak backward into the time of the Babylonian captivity, when the Babylonians said to them, will you sing some of those really pretty songs about the Lord and Zion for us? We like those songs. This is what the Babylonian captives wanted to hear. It's kind of like, turn it to the radio station I like. And so they said to the Babylonian captors, how can we sing about Zion when we're captive here in a foreign land? When you've stripped Zion away from us and destroyed it. So you can see how that in this being liberated, God had done a miracle for them. Now this coincides in some ways, and I want to bring this forward to the 1st century when John the Baptist appears. Very similar circumstances. The Jewish nation was under the thumb of Rome. They believed that they were the navel of the world, that they were God's people after all, and so why should they be captive to Rome in the way that they are? Rome should be bowing to Jerusalem, not the reverse. That's what they felt. So this John the Baptist shows up, this really weird guy wearing weird clothes, eating weird food, shows up in the wilderness. I mean, who eats locust? I know there are nations around the world. I know in some of the Oriental nations they eat bugs like that. I've even seen where they're trying to get us. It's not been successful thus far. It's hard to substitute for barbecue, but they're saying we should eat mealworms, capture mealworms and fry them up in spaghetti and things like that. I don't think so, but maybe for some of you, you'd like that. I don't know. But anyway, John the Baptist shows up, this weird guy, and he attracts attention. Well, he attracted attention at a time when the scholars in Jerusalem thought, the Messiah is coming. It's that time of history. I mean, they could take Daniel 9 and they could work the math out. They could work it out better than we could. And so they knew that somebody was supposed to show up like another Elijah. That's what they expected. So they said, is John the guy? They looked at him. He said, I'm not the guy. He said, I'm just here to make the way straight for the one who is coming, whose sandals I'm not even fit to untie. So the whole nation is confused by John to some degree for a variety of reasons. One, because he says he's not the Messiah and he looks so strange, they think he must be. And the other is because John is baptizing for repentance. Well, for the Jewish mindset, the Pharisee would come to the river's edge there and listen to John and say, why do I need to be baptized for repentance? I'm one of the family. I'm a Jew. I don't have any need for it. I can understand these pagan Romans coming and John baptizing them for repentance. That makes sense. But me, I'm not one of those who needs this repentance. Boy, doesn't that sound modern. John began his work around 25 AD. We know that because Luke locates it all in such a finely edged timeline that we know about when all of this occurred. And the Jewish intelligentsia are looking for this famous person. And of course, they're looking for somebody very specific. They're looking for the Davidic Messiah, the one who's going to come, conquer Rome, throw them off. Rome's going to bow down to us. And then John the Baptist just says, sorry, I'm not him. I'm not the one you're looking for. And then John says something really strange. He says, of the Messiah who is to come, I must decrease while he increases. And I thought about that for a minute. I wonder if you got on LinkedIn and put that in a job search resume, how successful that would be. Probably not very successful. I must decrease, whoever I'm working for must increase. I don't know. That doesn't fit. But then again, because, none of us want to be a nobody, but then you've got God's economy to think about. Psalm 84 says, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the Lord's temple than I had be someone great. Again, doesn't sound like a great resume point, but this is the way God's economy actually works. How many of us are truly satisfied? Think about this for yourself, and as I think about it for myself. Just satisfied being the Lord's, wherever he's got us planted, whatever it is we're doing, whatever that looks like. Think about it in terms of this past few months in our electoral process. Why is it that this electoral process, besides the fact that maybe some of your candidate didn't seem to win, besides that, what about the electoral process is so upsetting to us? Well, I think is a big part of that is because it makes us nobodies. If our votes don't count for anything, if there's so much shenanigans, so much corruption in the voting process that our votes don't matter, then that makes us even more a nobody. And that's a very upsetting thing. The one empowerment we do have nationally is that we can vote, right? But that's been stripped away. Well, think about the Jewish nation at the time in history when John the Baptist shows up. They're completely powerless. Rome has no quarter for any kind of resistance whatsoever. Any resistance is quelled. People die when they resist Rome. And these same Jews who are so upset by the fact that they're being held in effect in subjugation by Rome are looking at the time in their history when the Messiah should show up and set them free. And it's not happening in the way that they expect. John the Baptist says, I am not the person. So they're looking forward to something. And I think about it in terms of just our own popular life here in this country, in the West, where we have so much. All of us in this room look forward to stuff. I do. I look forward to all kinds of things. I'm looking forward to the fact that we've got a way now to do PowerPoint here in the church coming up pretty soon. I'm kind of excited about that. But we look forward to a vacation. Some people will work their whole life to obtain an experience or whatever it is that they can have that steps in front of them that they say, I'm looking forward to that. I just wonder, what do we look forward to? Do we look forward to being here on a Sunday? Do we look forward to that? Do we look forward to the time we spend with God? Is that even important to us in the scheme of our lives? Or do we just live our life in the daily movements and in the daily things that confront us without any sense of the important things that we might look forward to? I don't know. Advent should inspire us, I think, to some degree, to look forward to God, just being with Him. Not in the things that He does so much, but in the fact that we have Him as that companion that we can always turn to. Think about the way that God treats you and me compared to the way, say, for instance, our working life might treat us. Let's say that one of us goes to our job, whatever that job is, and we make a serious mistake on the job, whatever that mistake might be. Well, when our superiors find out we've made the mistake, yeah, they might forgive us and allow us to keep our job, but they'll never trust us again in the way that they trusted us before we made the mistake. There'll be this long process of having to earn that back somehow. But that's not the case with God at all. I mean, look at Israel. They fell away. Think of the condition here of coming back to God. Why did they come back? They came back because they were so miserable by the oppressor, the oppressing nations, making them miserable, that they said, we'd rather be back with God. It's not that they really wanted God. They just wanted the oppressor taken away. And that's kind of like how we are. We just want things to be better. God will come back to you if you just let us if things would be better, we would come back. And God takes us back like that. Like C.S. Lewis says, we run from hell with the flames, our jacket smoldering with the flames of hell chasing us, and God says, come on in. I'm happy to have you here. And Israel, 7 cycles of up and down, and every time they repented because God sent the Canaanites, or God sent the Philistines, or God sent the Babylonians, or God sent whoever. They came back to God because they were made miserable, and God said, I'm glad to have you back. He never said, now you remember here, I'm not going to look at you the same way I did before. He never does that. He always just says, come back, and I'm happy to have you. Look at Paul. I mean, Paul was a murderer. How many children, families were broken up? We think about what we were talking about, Pam, with Manuel and immigration and children in cages on TV. Well, in Paul's case, they separated those families so that they could kill them all separately or imprison them. Just imagine being in a Palestinian home, and Paul brings the temple guard in, and the temple guard drags you and your family out, and you never see your children again. Your children never see the parents again. You don't know what happened to them and why, because they're part of this new way that Paul is trying to stamp out. And yet, all of that history, and God makes Paul the chief apostle in the entirety of the New Testament era. Entrusts Paul with the whole church. Wow. I think Christmas is the best time of year for you and me. We're already believers, right? We say, okay, Jesus is Lord. Christmas is all about Jesus. That little goofy poem, The Reason for the Season, all that stuff that we love to say. I think it's a good time of year for us to stop and think what Isaiah said about you and me is absolutely true. We have all gone astray. Simple as that. Don't ever think ourselves somebody in terms of we've done so well or we've lived for God for the last hour, but forget about the other 6 hours where maybe we weren't. And God just says, I'm just glad to have you. I know you've gone astray. Why do you think I sent Jesus to the cross? None of us can get rid of what we've done. Nobody in this room, me included, none of us get rid of what we've done, who we were. We can't be set free of the sin that's in us. We can't be set free from the sins we've committed. We can't be set free from the damage we've done to people, to ourselves. But God says, come on in, I'll give you a new day. You've all gone astray. That's all right. All you've got to do is turn to me. And unfortunately for some of us, just like with the nation of Israel, He allows the misery meter to ramp up until we'll finally come back. And we think, oh, this is terrible. But look at it from the perspective of somebody who's trying to prepare us for eternity with Him. It's worth it. And I guarantee you, after a few million years pass by, we'll look back and say it was worth it. Whatever I suffered, there was nothing compared to what I have now. God gives us the same grace that He used to bring a Messiah in the world that made a way for you and me. He's going to be there when we call Him. Just think of this as we think about this leaving here today. Those St. Jude hospital commercials, I hate those things because they kill you. You see these little kids just suffering, and you think, what in the world is right about that? But you know what's interesting about that with those little kids? I don't know if you've ever, I'm assuming most of you in this room, as I look about, have been to the doctor with a small child at some point. You go in there and it's scary. And the doctor's going to stick them with stuff and bring these weird-looking instruments up and poke around in their ears. And then he might show up, or she might show up with a needle. I'm going to stick this needle in you. And the little kids, think about them in terms of something serious where they're being treated for something. Scary procedures, painful procedures. But then all they want is for mom and dad to just be there. Mom and dad can't take away the pain. Mom and dad can't make it not hurt. Mom and dad can't make it not scary. But the child still wants mom and dad there. God is just like that. We cry out and God rushes in. Always. The Jews cried out. God sent Cyrus the king. And then Cyrus liberated them. The Jews cried out and the world cried out and God sent Jesus. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, I'll stay as long as it takes after we close. Thank you for your attention. Oh, I did it again, sorry. 15 years, I'm still doing the wrong things. Okay.
We were just waiting on it.